Okay, so now we're going to create a bouncing ball animation using similar tools as we discussed with the pendulum. Although the spacing of the bouncing ball we're going to see is a bit different to the pendulum in terms of the loop. We have a slow out at the top, going towards where the ball actually makes contact with the ground, right? But when it hits the ground and comes back up, the spacing coming out there is wider apart, further apart, and then comes back in and slows down again to the top, right? So the ball is starting off slow, comes fast, and then we have a fast in, right? Not a slow in, but a fast in to the ground, and then a fast out of the ground, and then a slow in. Right, so the ball is gaining energy, right? It starts off slow and it's picking up momentum as it goes towards the ground, and this ball would theoretically continue to speed up if that ground wasn't there, but because the ground is there to break the fall of this ball, right, it must react to hitting the ground there at that speed. And for every action there's a reaction. So when it hits the ground at that speed, it's going to bounce back up, right? So the speed, the energy is going to be transferred, the direction is going to be transferred, because this is a solid object that's hitting. It's going to be transferred in the other direction and make the ball go back up in the air, right? Starting off fast and then slowing down as the energy dissipates, right? So it loses its potential energy as it goes back up in the air. Alright, so that's just an explanation behind the spacing. So let's get into Maya and create a sphere. Alright, so we can start setting some keyframes in here, right? So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make the pivot towards the base. So I'm going to press D and align the pivot towards the base vertex there. Press D again and select it again, and I'm going to snap it to the center there with grid snapping, holding down X on the keyboard. Right, so now I have my ball in place with the pivot in place, and I want this to be my default 0 position, right? So I want to freeze the transformation, so I'm going to modify freeze transformations. Right, so now I'm ready to start setting keyframes. Right, so so what I could do is I could maybe choose the same timing as the last time, start at 0 and end on frame 24. Alright, so let's see how that looks. Right, so this time for ease of demonstration, I'll start with the ball in the air this time. So I'm just going to raise it up in the air, just straight up in the translate Y. Alright, see I moved it roughly about 8 units up, and set the keyframe there, and I'll set another keyframe on frame 24, and the in between will be on frame 12, and this is where it's going to be on the ground. So I'm going to zero out the translate Y and put it on the ground at frame 12. Oh, and just like before, which I forgot to do, I want to enable step preview. Alright, so now we're only seeing, right, so we're taking the same 2D approach here. Right, so we're seeing the timing of the ball here, the rough timing of the bounce of the ball here. Alright, so what we didn't explore with the pendulum is how we can change the timing in the timeline. So with the ball selected, right, we see all these red ticks in the timeline, and I'm sure with other animation packages like Toon Boom, you know how to select your keyframes and move them around in the timeline. So we can do that in Maya as well. And how we do that in the timeline here is if I hold shift and drag across around a keyframe, right, I don't even have to drag that much. I could just do maybe 1 or 2 keyframes before and after, right, and we see these little arrows here, right? The center arrows are what I'm going to use to click and drag these keyframes around. So I'm going to drag this one down right? Let's say if I drag this one all the way down to 4, and then I click and shift drag and get this one and move it down to 8. Alright, and I play that. Alright, that's probably a bit too fast. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag them. Alright, drag the center one to 8 and drag this one to 16. Right, and the reason I'm doing this is because I'm putting my animation on 8s now. So if I set the entire, right, so if I make the visible end of my timeline 16, alright, we see the timing I have there now. And the reason why, you know, I made this is just really for demonstration purposes, and because, you know, it gives us a pretty decent timing for this bouncing ball, is because it's so much easier to in between animation that is on 8s, right? So every 8 frames, right, I have an extreme pose, and you know, I can just divide this into 2, right? So to divide in 8 into 2, I can, you know, go to frame 4, and then to divide that into 2s again, I can just divide between 4 and 8, I just go straight to 6, and it's a straight in between, right? Between 4 and 0, I just go straight to 2, and it's a straight in between, right? So you know, that is convenient. It would give us even timing, you know, if we're doing character animation like that. So it's not always recommended to, you know, have even timing, but for a bouncing ball, you know, for this bouncing ball, you know, we can get away with some even timing, right? So I'm just doing this for this demonstration. Okay, so now we're ready to start setting some in-betweens here. Right, so I'll start off. I can go again to visualize and turn on ghost selected. We have the same settings I did before, right? If you don't, if it's, you know, the default settings are this, so you know, just have to choose our custom frame steps, make your step size 2 because we're working on 2s, and click ghost. Alright, so now we're seeing, right, this ball is coming towards this position on frame 8, so we need an in between there. Right, so we're not going completely halfway, we're definitely favoring, right, and I want to make a point of really pushing that favoring on this frame 4 more towards where the ball started from. Alright, and I will, you know, want a similar frame for frame 12, right, between 8 and 16 when the ball is traveling back up, so I can just copy that frame from frame 4, middle mouse drag it to frame 12 and press S to set that keyframe there. Right, so now, right, we're getting a little bit more smooth animation, so I'm just going to keep breaking down these keys here, right? So next, right, I need a key between 4 and 0, right, so between here and here, right, so I'm definitely going to favor this first position, really, you know, get it a lot closer there than to the position at 4. In fact, I might even end up bringing 4 a bit higher now that I'm looking at that spacing, so I'll bring 4 just a little bit higher and copy that over to 12 again. Right, and now between 4, this position, this position, this position, you know, the key, I need another breakdown. So I'm not going to make it straight in between like that. I'm going to, you know, favor this one here. Right, so I want that spacing to be gradually getting further and further apart, all the way down. Right. So I'm doing the same thing on this side. So, right, on frame 14, it's going to be favoring the top up here, right? So it's pretty much the same as frame 2, so I can just copy frame 2 over to frame 14. and set that keyframe there, and between 8 alright, so I could probably just decrease my steps here because it's getting a bit confusing with all these different balls on the screen here. So I can go visualize, ungo selected, and go again, visualize, go selected, visualize, go selected option box, and I'll change the before and after to 1 now, and click ghost. Alright, so now we're more or less seeing right. So I need to make a keyframe between here and here, similar to the one at 6. So I can just copy over that one from 6 and set that keyframe there. Alright, so if we look at this spacing now, we're getting a pretty decent feeling of weight on this bounce. Alright, if I turn off with the visualize, ungo selected, alright, we get a sense of the weight on this ball. It's speeding up as it's coming towards the ground, and then speeding up as it comes off of the ground, and then slowing down as it reaches the highest point. Right, so that's basically our spacing for this bouncing ball. That is the 2D approach, right, just as we did with the pendulum. So if I turn off my step preview now, right, we'll see a smoother visualization of this. And let's go into the graph editor and look at how these curves are working in the graph editor. So if I go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, right, I'm looking at my translate Y curve here. Alright, so if we look in here, we could actually see, right, that I could have pushed this spacing even more. Right, it's actually getting a bit linear here. Right, so this is what the graph editor is good for in terms of really pushing your spacing. Right, sometimes it's not so easy to, you know, really see the spacing. You know, you can eyeball it in the view here, but you know, if you really want some really nice spacing with a gradual, you know, a gradual arc, and then coming steep into that bounce there, right, this is what the graph editor is really good for. So what I'm going to do is, just as a rough guide, I'm just going to go to curves, buffer curve, and take a snapshot here, right, and make sure I have the buffer curve showing, right, under view. And I could in fact just get rid of all of these, in fact, keyframes, except for, you know, these extremes here. What I'm going to do now is break the tangents on this center one here, because if I was to, you know, make this one steeper here, right, you know, yes, it works for this side here, but look at what it's doing to that side here. It's messing up the other side, right? So what I have to do is select the key and go to tangents, break tangents, right, or there's a shortcut button, which is this one here. Just click that button and it breaks the tangents, right? So now I can select this side here and middle mouse drag that one up like that, right? So we see I'm matching the spacing there, right, but I'm getting a much cleaner gradual fall off here and into a fast in here, right, which is what we really want. With the, you know, with the default, I was actually slowing down a bit as it's going to the ground, right? I didn't actually notice it by sight, but you know, I'm seeing it here, and that's not what we want, right? We want this to gradually get faster and faster until it hits the ground. Alright, same thing on this side. I want it to start off fast, right? Start off really fast and then lose energy, slow down as it gets back up to the top there. Right, so now let's see what we've done with just these three keyframes here. Right, and yeah, you know, if we were to compare the two versions, you know, the difference, you could probably feel the difference, right, looking at those two versions there. Right, so that is really, you know, how we can work the timing and the spacing using the graph editor, using the timeline, using tangents in Maya. So hopefully this will help you later on when we go into animating a bouncing ball falling forwards and then dissipating to a stop.